Of owning a cafe and other heroic deeds by Beware the Tristero. Chapter 169. At long last. Shota's point of view. Part 2. Slightly pulling away from the two young men he'd helped to raise since they were 16, Shota was caught between two warring emotions.
Even going out of our minds, you know?
Yeah, so don't be too mad at that, mate, for, well, this, okay? He'd always been proud of them, but to see them here now, even in the face of what he knew would have been a terrifying spectacle, they'd stood together.
I don't mean to brag, but I did punch that scrawny thief guy pretty hard.
I'm pretty sure their clothes were singed right along with their hair, too. Fought together side by side, and even though Tomra had been shot and reverted back to his quirkless state, he couldn't not be proud, both as their parent cum guardian and their sensei. However, the pair of you, now I know how you must have felt whenever I went dashing off to fight. He sighed, his left hand moving to cup their jaws in turn. But as your father, I am now 100% decreeing that you're never to rush into that kind of danger ever again.
What?
Oh, come on, Goethe, you're my sons, and I love you. He cut in, his eyes flashing at them. So, if either of you want to eat my food again, you'll agree to my terms, and only ever use the skills I taught you for self-defense. He added, his right arm cuddling a chuckling Airy a little closer to him whilst the married men openly bonked at him. He interrupted, his grin desperately fighting to break through the deadpan look he was going for. Since you're both this eager, I'll have as you rope you into an adult hero course, how's that? Snickering a little, his smile blooming, Shota couldn't help but feel all the lighter when the pair huffed, muttered curses, looked at each other, and... Fine, but... is she okay? Blinking, their attention turning to the child, Shota sighed softly before erasing the flickers of light ghosting around the single horn protruding from her head while she curled into him. Out of all the terrible, hideous things Chisagi had done to this child, convincing her that she was a monster was the most insidious, for although the pain of cutting her would be something she'd remember, damaging her mental health in order to keep her under his control would take a hell of a lot of undoing, wouldn't it? Maybe he should throw his entire moral compass out the window and just ask the man who'd unofficially adopted him to toss the golden-eyed fucker into a pit somewhere in the wilderness and keep him there for good. He knew he wasn't cut out for the whole pro-hero thing and that kind of thinking. Well, maybe he should quit while he was ahead. The kids would be okay at UA without him. After all, and he had Airy to think about now, didn't he? How's the itching stop now, sweetheart? He asked her softly, those glistening, cheery eyes blinking up at him in bewilderment, not at his ability to cut off the power that terrified and traumatized her in equal measure, but that he was being kind to her. She's getting there, aren't you? She's going to be okay. We all are. And thanks to you three and her, the healing has already started, hasn't it? That he was genuinely concerned about her and her well-being, that he saw her as a sweet, vulnerable child who deserved love, affection, and everything in between. Murder is wrong. Killing at Shisaki won't change anything. It won't undo Tomura being shot. It won't shift the worry from Dabi's eyes. It won't make my other kids, my brothers, my friends, my husband feel better, and...
A murder is wrong,
he chanted to himself whilst the girl nodded shyly and the other men looked on curiously. Because Airy has the ability to rewind living things back to a previous state, he told them, his attention refocusing on the girl he held. It's an incredible power that I've started training her to use at will, which is something she'll have to keep working on, but she was able to heal us both quite a bit before you guys came to our rescue. He smiled, her small form curling further into his chest abashedly. God, he'd be filling her head with as many compliments and self-esteem boosting comments as he could, whenever he could, and encouraging everyone else to do the same. Somehow he didn't think he'd need to convince his family to agree to such things, either. I thought that we might need to make a run for it, and although she was really scared about using it, she tried her best, fixed my broken ankle, and did an overall excellent job. He added, her cheeks pinking, whilst Dabi and Tomra beamed at her.
She's the bravest person I know, which, considering how brave you two are, has to be saying something, right?
Rewind, eh? How very intriguing. Grinning at the beautiful display before him, Oliver one couldn't help but feel his old habits flooding back to the surface despite his new outlook. For that power was tempting, wasn't it? And certainly too much for such a young child to handle, surely. So it wouldn't be too villainous of him to suggest removing it from her, would it? Even if it was just until she was older? He'd have to broach the subject carefully, though, for his dear Shouta was nothing if not fiercely protective and instinctively brilliant, which would mean, of course, that he may not see this suggestion as the helpful aid he intended it to be. Well, for the most part, anyway.
You shouldn't go selling yourself and your own efforts so short, my boy,
he offered instead, his smile broadening, whilst he placed a fatherly hand upon the eatery owner's shoulder once more.
Now then, shall we away to somewhere a little more comfortable? I'll be going to collect that wayward husband of yours and the rest of your friends at 3, so that gives us an hour or so to catch up properly now, doesn't it? He furthered. Plus, you've yet to have a proper tour of my country now, have you, Wouldn't it be nice to, I don't know, maybe stay a couple of days? You're certainly deserving of some vacation time, right?
Watching the dark-haired man and the younger men he'd helped to raise up and roll their eyes in unison, you two knew that he'd wanted them around when they nodded, their shoulders sagging in relief as the idea of safety, as the idea of this nightmare being over, finally washed over them. Preening a little, he turned to yet another door. Getting those Yakuza brats debriefed by Gigantomachia was admittedly overdoing things a little, but after everything he'd seen in Shota's mind, after he'd watched those bastards dangle the well-being of those dear children over the eraser quirk user's head, after he'd felt the pain his dark-haired, unofficially official son had experienced at the hands of Chisaki in particular, and the grief he'd punished himself with for not having escaped with young Eri without causing trouble for everyone else, he'd be sure to raise the matter with Toshinori later on. Out of everyone, no one would be in better position to help monitor, soothe, and support the young Iriri owner. He'd insist upon it.
Well, that is splendid news,
he breathed, his hands gesturing around the gold gilding and multitudinous windows they were approaching.
Melissa will be thrilled, of course,
he continued breezily, whilst leading the group into one of the elegantly decorated corridors, his own ire having died away in the light of their reunion.
And I have rooms to suit all of you, I'm sure,
he quipped lithely, before stopping them before a grand vista, his eyes glinting knowingly as they gaped at the tropical view sprawling out across a panorama he'd never be sick of saying.
This, I believe, has been a long time coming, don't you agree?
Watching his oldest wards gaze excitedly through the gargantuan window, Yagi Aizawa Shouta similarly helped Eri to look through the wide-spanning glass.
Holy crap! Pterodactyls are... Oh, wait, geez, son. Are people riding them?
Ugh, I wish I had my sketchy tablet with me. Hey, Eri-chan, you want a closer look? Before passing her over to a delighted Dobby, the turquoise-eyed man showcasing his natural big brotherly instincts, as he effortlessly curled her into a comfortable position and pointed out things for the wide-eyed 4-year-old to admire, her lips slowly, finally giving over to a smile. God, how he wished he had his phone with him to capture that precious expression.
It's sometimes hard to believe that something as positive as freeing a child from bondage can come from such terrible circumstances, isn't it?
Humming, everyone clearly too delighted by the real-life Jurassic Park they'd paused to view on their way to a living room somewhere deeper inside this mansion of a home to be in a rush, shut aside.
Yes, it is,
he murmured in reply, his arms crossing defensively despite himself.
She's had to go through so much,
he continued, his eyes narrowing.
And you were there for her when she needed you the most,
the older man corrected gently.
Why, you're the very reason that she's free,
he continued warmly.
You kept her safe the best you could. You've given her everything she could need under all but impossible circumstances. You chose to stay in that living hell for her protection, and that, my boy, is more than most would do," he told him, his tone fine and his smile wry. He recognized that look.
"You want to take her quirk, don't you?" Feeling his lips flicker into something close to a smile when the villain bonked at him before turning sheepish, the cafe owner upped. "Not for any nefarious purposes, you understand?" The crimson-eyed country healer tried, his hands waving in an abortive gesture. "I had only thought that it would be a good idea to retain it for her until she is older and more physically and emotionally equipped to handle such a power. That's actually a great idea," he finished for him, the older of the two balking once more, his own smile pushing forward at the look Shigaraki now wore before the reality of Eri's previous living conditions sobered him up. Chisaki told her that she was a monster, that the people he had been forced to kill were for her sake, that she murdered her biological father in cold blood. He confided, his eyes once again zoning in on the girl. "And that over there, that's a waterfall, can you see it?"
Oh, and those pretty colors over it, what are they?
"That's a rainbow. It's made by light bouncing off the water. Do you like it?"
It's so pretty."
"It's not as pretty as you are, little sis." The happiness he saw playing across her face as the first of her big brothers gushed and cooed all over her was enough to melt his heart all over again. Such good kids. Such good men. God, he really wished he had his phone, a camera, anything, but there'd be time for that, wouldn't there? "You have my wholehearted reassurance that Chisaki and his followers will regret ever laying hands on either of you, and that his talents will be used to serve the people of New Eden, whilst the rest of them will labor away with food and board. Of course, I know what a stickler you are when it comes to second chances," the reformed criminal promised quietly. "And as for Eri, should you need any further assistance in attaining legal guardianship of her, I can always arrange for her grandfather to be revived now that I have Overhaul at my disposal," he mused. "I'm certain he could be convinced that a life with you would be better for her, especially since he'll no doubt be facing lofty jail time, given his status as an Oyabun." He shrugged. "Although I wouldn't be opposed to him coming here and—" "Wait a second, that's right, Yuta-san." He blinked, his eyes widening, whilst he turned to him fully. "I just remembered." He breathed, his smile souring. There is a friend of mine who Chisaki tortured and locked away in a coma." He revealed, his brows furrowing slightly. "He's part of my community, and if possible, I'd be incredibly grateful if you could consider it done, my boy." The taller man grinned. "Consider it done." Watching his father quietly chat with the man he'd once hated, Aizawa Dabi then refocused his attention upon his husband, who'd swaddled up Eri in a hug while they both gushed over the diplodocus in the distance. He still couldn't quite believe what had happened this week. He couldn't help but be grateful to the snowy-haired man so casually stood there like any other man, and not the literal god that he was. As terrifying as that thought was, there was an odd comfort to it, too. Maybe, a happy ending that he'd always pushed out of his mind for himself could be reached now. It wouldn't be wrong now, would it? Their Keta was safe. Everyone was either okay or on their way to being so. Come along, then. We shouldn't keep David and Melissa waiting, should we? There'll be plenty of time for exploring later, you'll see. Blinking out of his thoughts, the flame quirk user stepped towards the man who'd saved him in so many ways, his boots soundless upon plush carpeting. God, he was so glad he was here, that he was alive, that he could continue to adore and support the first person to pull him away from a life of pain, starvation, and more than likely villainy, and without a word shared between them just like that, the older, slightly taller rookie pro was gravitating towards him. Only this time, it was him who roped the comforting arm around the other's still hospital pajama-clad shoulder. Only you could fall into a viper's pit and come out of it with a princess, you know? Relaxing a little when the cafe owner chuckled, his eyes rolling fondly, he similarly grinned when a tentative elbow poked his side. Hey, if we're following the story you and Tomra have laid out in your fantastic video game, that'd make the pair of you my gallant knights in cotton blend armor, and Yuta-san the wise old king, wouldn't it? Less of the old, thank you. I'm like a fine whiskey after all, for I only become better and more distinguished with age," the country leader quipped his commentary, electing laughter from them all before Dobby let out a little sigh. "I feel more like the fire-breathing dragon, really," he confided quietly, their eyes meeting as he lowered his volume. "Do you think he could—" He tried before his eyes closed, and he shook his head. "Forget I said anything. We've got more important—" "You are important," Shouta interrupted, his expression determined as he stopped them, his form turning so that those gentle, loving hands could cup his face, those careful thumbs smoothly brushing over his damaged, scaly, burnt skin. Did he know what he wanted? But that was wrong of him, wasn't it? His quirk, his defunct body that couldn't handle its heat, that's what had made him who he was today, wasn't it?
"Dobby could,"
his father murmured.
"If this is what you want, then that's wonderful, and I'm sure that he'll agree to everything."
The older man offered warmly.
"It's okay to not want to be in pain. It's okay to want to put your physical past behind you. And besides,"
he grinned, his head cocking to the side, a true smile grazing his features,
"you'll still look cool without all of those staples and your mom's white hair, you know."